Okay, let's get started. How's the sound? The voice? Yep, perfect, thank you. So, you're attending the most worthy session towards the end of the day, or of all the sessions at the end of the day. And we'll be talking about beginning editing and editing UI patterns for ArcGIS Pro, for the ArcGIS Pro SDK. If that's what you would like to hear, you're in the right session. Welcome. My name is Thomas Emge, and next to me you have my wonderful colleague, Narelle Chatsky, and we'll split up our presentation. So let's take a step back and kind of like take a look on what is in the ArcGIS desktop editing namespace. As part of the SDK, we are shipping two tools for Visual Studio, which are the construction tool and the sketch tool. The major difference is they are related, but the difference is, think of the construction tools you would write if you're creating new features, and the sketch tool if you're modifying an existing feature with respect to geometry and attributes. So this is kind of like the high-level differences between those two tools. Furthermore, we have convenience classes in this namespace. Primarily, we're going to take a look at the inspector class that has some very nice convenience methods that allows us to streamline attribute editing. We'll talk about accessing and modifying edit templates. And then finishing off for this presentation with annotation support. And overall in that namespace we also find the edit operations and the edit events. We're not going to talk really too much about edit events. Those is covered in the tomorrow section where we're going into more advanced topics. Well, not us, but colleagues of ours. So let's get started with the fundamentals of the edit operation. Essentially, everything you do within the Pro SDK related to editing, it should be, as a fairly general statement, be wrapped into an edit operation. And the reason why you would want to do is, so there are a lot of mechanisms in place that will let the framework know that something has changed, has been created, has been updated, or deleted. One of the nice things that also happen is the edit operations go onto the undo and redo stack. So if we're looking at the code below, the first line is like, well, we're creating an edit operation, then we're giving it a name. This is the string that will appear on the undo and redo stack. Next, we're taking the edit template, the editing template, which is part being passed on to us or into us. And then the next line is where we're queuing the create. So the first geometry that we're getting in here, we'll take a look at that in a little bit, but essentially is going to be the display or the interactive geometry from what we've sketched on the screen. So we're queuing this as part of our edit operation. We can add more queue or more actions into our queue. In this case, we're just maybe doing a reshape on that one. And as a result, or the end is that we're saying, okay, whatever is in our edit operation, let's execute this. In this case, we're calling it async. So we're not blocking anything. Methods as part of the edit operation. Some examples are listed here for create, modify, delete, cut. This is pretty much, I would say, 90% of the time you should be using those convenience methods that are provided to you. In this example, when we're putting something into the queue for the edit operation, we're providing information. But if you're taking a closer look at the overloads for the various methods, it's also possible that we're returning information as a result of that. And where you would use it is, for example, if you would create a new feature and would like to add attachment. So again, we're setting up an edit operation, and on the line we're saying actually create, we're also providing an action that will take a result, in this case the object ID of the newly created feature, and that we're storing into the new _OID variable. Now, why do we want to do that? Because as a subsequent operation, we would actually like to put an image as an attachment onto this newly created feature. So in the first line, we're creating it and receiving the object ID out of it. And if it has successfully executed, we're actually creating something that's called a create chained operation. So that is a logic subsequent operation. And this subsequent operation, in our case, is the add attachment that requires the object ID of our newly created feature as an input. Even though there are essentially 2 executes in this code section, it will appear, due to it being classified as a chained operation, as one item on the undo and redo stack. Our basic construction tool layout is inheriting from the map tool. So it is that we have some display feedback that we're acting upon. And what we're seeing here, what's highlighted, is the sketch type, so the feedback type. And in this case, it is a point. So when you click it, you kind of like get the single point experience that once you click, the onSketch complete is getting fired, and then we can proceed with our operation. In this case, we're essentially taking the point as is and creating a new feature out of that. Now, before we take a look at it, kind of like if you picture it in your create pane for a feature class, once you click that, you have a few tools that are available to you. Now, how do we get into this place? And this is where we're getting into the demo and associating it with a target geometry type. So in this case, we're associating ourselves with the point geometry type. So all the point feature classes that I have in my document will list now my tool as a supported tool for the subsequent operation. So we're tagging in the demo our tool into a category ref ID, and for that one we have essentially point lines and polygons, multi-points, and annotations. That is new at 2.1. So that is a new feature for 2.1. Now, new with, I think that was introduced with 2.0, right? That's where it came in the options. Or is that 2.1 as well? So that came in at 2.0, sorry, is that we can also provide an additional options dialog as part of our creation tool. And that essentially is an embeddable control that is being associated with our standard construction tool. If you look towards the bottom of the XML, essentially we're updating the editing tools options, and we're inserting ourselves there as a component. So we give it an ID, and we use familiar model, MVVM patterns, so the view model as the class and the container for the UI component as the view. And then with the component that we have defined here, we're adding that on top of our tool, onto the top tool options ID tag. So that makes that link, once the tool is activated, it knows how to pull the right component. For our view model, essentially what is special for our construction tool is the implementation of the editing create tool control interface. And that gives us the ability to hook into places. So when our template is being activated, or when the template properties are being activated, this is then the chance where we can retrieve and insert our information. Essentially, it's a dictionary that allows us to store values that we would like to use. On the view model itself, the elements are stored as properties. And in this little code snippet you see here, essentially on the setter, we're checking our dictionary. Does that property with that name already exist? If it does, or if it does not, then we'll add it in there. Otherwise, we'll just update the value with the current component and then trigger an update notification on this property. Now, how we're using that within the construction tool itself. The magic is here that we're going through the current template that allows us to retrieve that property of the tool options, and then in this case, with a function or with a property, we're retrieving, if it does exist, either a default behavior, or we're actually pulling the stored value that was passed in to our view model. And then on the sketch complete, we can take advantage of this property. And with that, let's go into a demo. So here we're just looking at the stub.code. And the difference here from what was previously shown on the slide is, well, we're inheriting from the map tool. We're saying, okay, we would like to get display feedback. So is sketch tool is true. And in our case, we're actually digitizing a line as the sketch type, but we're producing a polygon out of that. So we're buffering it and then put it into a different geometry type as our target. So sketch type, a line, but we're associating ourselves with a target type of polygon. And that association we'll see on the category ref ID. So here we're taking an editing construction polygon as our target. If we're taking a look down below, let's take a look at our UI component. So this is the ID. We're specifying our view model and the content itself as the UI component. Let's take a quick look on what it's going to look like. And it's not really anything special. It's just a label in the text box. It's simple. Whoa. It's going to be good, trust me. It's really good. Well, let's look at this one. Beautiful. So we have a label and essentially a text box that we're binding to a property onto our view model. And so let's switch over to our view model. It's an embeddable control, but we're also implementing the iEditing create tool control interface. And we would like to activate ours, or what we're actually looking for in this case is when we're activating the template, this is where we want to hook in. So we retrieve the dictionary that's being handed to us, and then we initialize our option. So let's just go ahead and take a look on how that works. So let's start debugging. I'm blaming it on you, Narelle. It's your PowerPoint that... Just a minute ago, it was a lot faster than that. Wow. There's Pro. So once Pro is getting started, let's pick one of the sample projects. Switch over to Create Features. Create Features. Okay, so here we're in the beautiful island of Hawaii. And we just have a couple of points, lines, and polygons as sample features on here. So for the Create Features, it's kind of like, just as a quick recollection, once you activate that, those are the available tools. So even though we specified the sketch type to be of polyline, this is not our current tool because we associated ourselves with the test polygons, and this is the one that we're looking for, the buffered line. So once we activate that, we actually jump into the code. So at that point, we're hooking into the initialization for our user interface. In this case, we're being handed the tool options, and if we're taking a look at that, currently there's nothing in there. So let's go ahead and actually jump to initialize options. So if it's empty, then we're getting out. If it's a null pointer, we're getting out. If it already has that, we'll just take it and store it internal into our view model, or we're taking a default variable or a default number, in our case 25, inserting it and notifying. So this is how we start to populate. And now this is the component with our label, our beautiful label and text box of value 25. So at this point, if we go ahead and start digitizing a line, once we're complete, we're stepping onto our onSketch complete. And in this case, we're taking that geometry and buffering it by the distance. So where is this one now coming on from? That is being in our tool. Take a look at that. So this one is, if you remember, that is a property that we have set up in our tool. Reading from the current template, retrieving the tool options from there, and essentially populating by the property name, the buffer, and getting the value out of that. So we're buffering the line by 25 meters, creating the feature, and then just go ahead. And so we have our little buffer in here. If we now go ahead and say, okay, let's update that number. We're hooking into the event mechanism that something has changed, so we need to update our property. I would like to make it to 75. Nope, I don't want to stop debugging. F5. Go ahead with another sketch. Go through the same experience. Sketch is complete. Now the buffer distance is a 75, containing the updated value of our dictionary. And now we have a bigger or a larger buffered line resulting in that polygon. Okay, so that was our construction tool. Let me quickly shut this down. Actually, go ahead. Oops. And queue up the inspector. So with going through this construction tool experience, the sketch tool is fairly similar. We're setting up our interactive sketching environment. In this case, we're using a rectangle. And then on the sketch complete, we can change attributes or change the geometry on this one. The difference here is that the sketch tool lives in a different place. So it's not living on the create features pane and associated to the geometry types, but these are designed to work with all types of geometries. And so it's going into its own category. The previous one was called Esri editing construction and then underscore based on the geometry type. And this one, we're going into Esri editing command list. If we're taking a look on the right-hand side, this is kind of the general layout of the pane. And with the additional tag of a content, we can also put it into its own categories. Furthermore, there are more places to put this tool. So we have galleries, and by specifying additional tags of gallery 2D or 3D, we can associate it with a 2D map behavior and put it into the gallery of tools or into the associated 3D gallery. Similar to the construction tool, we can provide an additional UI component in here. Very similar. It is based on an embeddable control. And we're using the same MVVM patterns to associate a view, model, view with our tool. The difference is, the only difference here is that it is not totally in the declarative mode, but as we're adding the component or inserting our component, the ID of the user interface, we're actually hooking into our tool directly in code. So this ID, that's being paired up that way. And then essentially from the embeddable control, we're retrieving the view model, and we're off and running essentially the same way, modifying the properties as we've seen previously. Let's take a look at one of the convenience classes, which is what we'd like to focus your attention to is the inspector class. It's a convenient way to access and update the attributes. It's also allowing us fairly quickly to retrieve the schema information from the layer itself. And as an added bonus, it brings its own UI component. Let's take a look at some samples. Essentially, from here, we're getting the selected set of features and creating a new inspector. And then out of that selected set, we're taking the first, loading the attributes and the values. And then we can use that a property on the inspector to get the shape, modify the shape, put it back, and in the dictionary kind of style fashion, quickly change the attributes. And then we're queuing up an edit operation, and we can pass in the whole inspector class itself into our edit operation. An even shorter version is doing the same, getting the selection, but we can actually call also the apply method on the inspector itself. And this will, in return or internally, do an edit operation. And so even this way, we're ending up on the undo and redo stack. fairly quickly to retrieve the schema information, a convenience method on the inspector. You just point it to the layer and say, please read the schema information, and then we can access the attributes fairly quickly through an enumerable collection. The control gives us access to the view model and view, so it's using the same patterns internally. And if we're just hooking it into a dock panel, this is kind of like the very nice out-of-the-box property grid that would be offered as part of that user experience. And how are we doing in time?
Okay, let's keep going.
Just a quick let's not really spend too much time on so fairly similar. We're setting up the tool. Quick look at the demo. The category ref ID. This is the one we're now inserting ourselves into the modify pane. But in this case, we're actually making use of one of the existing groups. So we're adding ourselves into the divide section, but we're placing us into the context of the split command. So we can pair up with existing tools. Hooking up the UI component, give it an ID, the view model and view. And this attribute, if we're going back to the tool implementation, we'll find back here at this place. So let's get this one quickly started into a debugging session. There you go, Pro's much quicker now, I think. So what this sketch tool does is it allows us to make a selection and then provide feedback on the features that are under our selection area. In this case, it's actually tied to point geometries. So as we're selecting, we're going through our first set of activation. And nothing has really happened because the initial wiring up is to a selected set, but I don't have a selected set yet. So if I'm now going ahead and create a rectangle, we're back in our onSketch complete. Here we're filtering out the first point layer. And essentially going through a selection of where we're creating a dictionary out of our selected features. And as we're instantiating our view model, we're actually creating an inspector, one of those convenient classes, and exposing it as a property on our view model. Now, what does that really mean? We're actually getting a lot of work for free. And so if we're just running through that, this is a .NET list, and essentially out of that list, we're selecting the first entry, and this is now the UI component that is being given to us by the inspector. So hovering over here, we can find out a little bit more about the object ID, as well as go ahead and provide changes. So this is some nice coupling up of providing out-of-the-box functionality with custom components as part of a sketch tool. And I think that's what I have.
Okay.
Let's double check on the slide. Are your slides working?
No.
Oh, they're not working?
Unfortunately, the PowerPoint on my machine has gone. in a big way, so we're going to have to be a little
Switching.
creative and do the PowerPoint on Thomas's machine and then the demo on my machine. Okay, so next we're going to talk about edit templates, and edit templates are a way to configure values and behaviors when you're creating the features. You saw some things with Thomas's when you were in the construction tool. Generally, within the application, the templates are defined for you every time a layer is added to the map when they're auto-generated by the application or when the project is open. It's only when you create a new template, delete a template, or modify an existing template that those templates are actually saved in the project file. So there is a property.
Oh, Q.
There you go. For the layer to know whether the templates need to be auto-generated or not, and that just happens to be stored in the SIM. The SIM is the cartographic information model that a lot of the different objects within ArcGIS Pro uses. So to create or modify templates, you need to use the SIM. To find information about a layer, you would need to use the SIM. In this particular example here, we have a layer and we're getting its definition, and that will give us the SIM definition of that layer. And one of the properties of that SIM, like I mentioned, is the auto-generate feature template property. Now, if that is true, then that means the application is in charge of generating the templates for you, and any work that you do as a developer is never going to stick. So you need to be changing that flag, make your changes for templates, and then write the definition back to that polygon layer. So here I'm changing my auto-generate feature templates flag to false. I'm then going to create a new feature template, set some properties on the template definition, such as the name and tags and possibly some default values. I'm going to get the list of templates that exist on the layer. I'm going to add my new template to that list. I'm going to assign that list back to the layer definition, and then I'm going to call set definition on the polygon layer to set that SIM definition back. Well, one of the important concepts with SIM is that there's always a get definition and a set definition pairing. So you do the get definition, you do your work, and then you call set definition. Next slide, please. Yes. One of the other things, apart from perhaps creating new templates, that you might want to do is modify an existing template. And one of the things that you're possibly likely to do is wanting to be able to set a construction tool as the default tool for that template. Normally, when you have a template, the default tool is the first construction tool that's assigned, and it's probably something that we as developers have written. For your custom construction tools, the way that you want to be able to define that as the default tool for a template is you need to add a GUID into the demo file for your default construction tool, for your custom construction tool. All ESRI written construction tools have this GUID already assigned, and you can find them by looking in the editing.demo file. For any custom construction tool, you need to add that GUID and that content tag yourself within the demo. And then within your code, what you need to do is you get your template, you get the definition of the template, you assign this secret GUID to the tool prog ID property, and then you call that matching set definition call. Now you as a developer might say, okay, so I have this tool prog ID property. How do I know it's actually this secret GUID thing? How come it's not a demo ID? And so unfortunately, some of the documentation may tell you these things, some of the documentation may not. So if you actually look at the template definition and the SIM and the XML, sorry, I'm doing this and it really means next slide. If you would actually look at the 2XML of your actual SIM feature template, some of the things that you will see is that tool prog ID actually is a GUID. So whilst we hope that the documentation may tell us everything, it doesn't always. And so as a developer, you kind of may need to be a detective every now and again. So finding the XML definition of some of these SIM objects is always a good thing to be doing when you're trying to manipulate the SIM yourself, because sometimes you're not going to know everything just by reading the documentation. So finding out what the XML looks like of an existing object within the application is always helpful. Now, having said that, and shown you the way to do that with all of the sim. We're hoping that later in 2018 we're going to be giving you some more generic extension methods to do template manipulation so that you don't actually have to deal with this auto-generate feature template flag and the sim itself. These extension methods are currently being worked on. We're hoping the 2.2 release they'll be there, so you should just be able to say layer.create template, pass in a name, a description, an array of default values, and hopefully a DAML ID instead of this secret little GUID. You're still going to have to define the GUID because that's what the application uses internally, but you shouldn't have to know what those GUIDs are. You should be able to process a DAML ID instead. Next slide, please. So now we need to swap over to my machine and we'll do a quick demo within Visual Studio. Jump to number 5. Hopefully we see Visual Studio, we do. So I have an add-in here, and within my add-in I have a simple construction tool, and the construction tool is basically a point construction tool which is going to create a buffer which ends up creating features in a polygon feature class. So you can see that here, my buffer point construction tool, I have a sketch type of type point, and within my onSketchComplete async, I come in here and I buffer the sketch geometry to a certain distance, create an edit operation, create a new feature using the current template and my buffered geometry. And what I want to do is make this new construction tool my default tool for a new template. So I have another little button that's just going to sit on my ribbon, and if I jump over to Pro, you can see that if I look at my add-in, I have this Add New Template button, and if I actually look over in my Create Features pane and I activate a template, you'll see my construction tool over here, which is the buffer point construction tool. So that construction tool has been registered with all layers of type polygon, and so for each of the templates that apply to polygon layers, they all have that tool available. But when I activate these templates, my tool is never the active tool. I want it to become the active tool for my new template. So when I click on my button here, my breakpoint is going to come through, and really all I'm doing is looking at particular polygon layers within my map, and then I'm going to jump onto the background thread. I'm going to get the sim definition of my polygon layer. I'm going to check my auto-generate feature templates flag, and if it's true, I want to set it to false because I want my new template to stick. I'm going to create my template object, create the name, write some tags, set some default values, and then I'm going to set a secret little GUID. And that secret little GUID was something that I added over here in my DAML file. And you can see that it's DE7077D9. And again, back over here, DE7977D9. So that's going to make that particular construction tool the default tool for my new template. I can go ahead and get the current list of templates on the layer, add my template to that list, assign it back, and then call my set definition. So now that I've finished running the tool, you can see that I have a new template assigned over here called my template, and when I activate it, you can see that the buffer tool becomes my active tool. So I can just click here and get a polygon feature created. Similarly, when I activate some of my other polygon templates, you'll see that none of these have changed because I didn't change that particular template definition. Okay, if we jump back to the slide, please.
Can't see the buttons.
Can't see the buttons. Wrong glasses.
No, it's so dark. There you go.
Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is annotation. Annotation is new at 2.1, particularly with the API. But they're a little bit different from some of the other feature classes and geometry types that you're used to. Annotation features store polygon geometry. They've always stored polygon geometry, even in the ArcMap days, and that's still true in Pro. And the polygon is actually the bounding box of the annotation text, and that's calculated by the application. So every time you modify the annotation text, or you change the font size, or you change the rotation, then that bounding box is going to be calculated by the application. So anything that's feature.shape, when that feature is an annotation feature, is always going to be a polygon. And as a developer, you really shouldn't modify that feature.shape at all, because anytime you do modify it, it's actually going to get overwritten by the application again. The shape that you're interested in modifying is the baseline geometry that the annotation text actually sits on. We're going to get to that in a minute. The other key difference between annotation and other geometry types is the schema. Annotation has a very specific schema, and there are only a few fields that are guaranteed to exist. A lot of the other fields you may find, you may not find them. And these fields store text formatting attributes such as the vertical alignment, the actual text string itself, what font, whether it's bold or italics or underlined. These fields are actually optional, and they're not system controlled, and they're not system protected. So even if those fields do exist in your schema, know that your users can actually delete those fields at any time. The only ones that are guaranteed and system protected are the 6 or 7 that are listed there: the annotation class ID, the symbol ID, the feature ID, the element, the Z order, the status, and of course object ID and shape. So the question is, how do I interact with an annotation feature if my schema is pretty limited and I can't get the shape? Well, the object that you iterate through at 2.1 is a sim-text graphic. And that sim-text graphic has this text string. It has all of the text attributes such as vertical alignment, horizontal alignment, font name, font size, font color, all of that type of stuff. It has other information such as callouts and leader lines with some complicated symbology. And it also has a shape. And this is the shape that you're interested in dealing with as a developer. It's the baseline geometry that an annotation text will sit upon. And that baseline geometry can be one of many geometry types. It can be a point, it can be a polyline. One of those polylines could be a 2-point line, it could be a Bezier curve, it could be an elliptic arc, it could be a multi-point, or it could also be a geometry bag, which is a new geometry type that got added at 2.1. So in order to access the sim-text graphic, you need to use an annotation feature object, which comes from the ArcGIS.Core.Data.Mapping namespace. And because it's a sim object, you have a getter and a setter. Similar to get definition and set definition, we have the get graphic and set graphic methods. Next, please. Of course, when you're modifying annotation, it's the same as any other feature and feature class. You need to wrap your modification in an edit operation. And doing that, it's going to add it onto the undo redo stack. But annotation has a special method that you need to call. You need to call the callback method. Now, up until now, we've probably mentioned in previous demonstrations and tech sessions that you should avoid the callback method at all possible. There's only a few special instances where you should be using that callback method. Annotation has now become one of those special cases where you need to use it. This is going to change possibly in the next release, or at least later in 2018. We're going to add in some inspector support for annotation. We don't have that right now. So please don't use the inspector when you're doing annotation. Because of the feature class and the schema limitations, the inspector object really shouldn't be used. What you need to use is the callback method. You need to do a search on a table. You need to use a non-recyclable cursor. And you need to use the get graphic and the set graphic methods. Next, please. So here's a little code snippet of how you would go about modifying some annotation. So first thing you do is you set up your edit operation. Set up the name, and you do the callback. And within the definition of that callback, you set up your query filter to define the object or objects that you're interested in finding. You use the get table method of the layer, and then you do a search on the table. And that second attribute of the search, you pass in false, meaning I'm interested in a non-recyclable cursor. From your cursor results, you iterate through all of those. You cast to an annotation feature, and you use the get graphic method to get your sim-text graphic. Once you have that sim-text graphic, all of the properties are available to you. The text, the symbol, the shape, So here we're going to change my text to hello world. I'm going to go ahead and change the symbol color to red. And then in this situation I've finished. So I'm going to use the set graphic method to set my new modified text graphic back to the annotation feature. Because I'm in the callback, I also need to call store on the annotation feature. And again, because I'm in the callback, I also need to refresh the cache. And so I call context.invalidate on the specific feature that I modified. And this makes sure that the map display gets refreshed and updated according to the changes that I've made.
In table views.
In the table views, yeah. And then finally, once I've finished within everything that I've wanted to do within the callback, the most important thing is to actually execute that edit operation. So if you've used edit operations before, you know that nothing is ever going to get executed until the execute method actually gets called. Next slide, please. Because annotation is new, we've added a lot of documentation. A member of the mapping team wrote a pro concepts annotation document, really just basic information about annotation in general and how it's set up in ArcGIS Pro. We wrote some pretty in-depth documentation about editing with annotation. You should definitely be reading all of these if you're interested in dealing with annotation. We have a number of couple of guides there for walkthroughs of how you might create construction tools or more modification tools. And then we have a sample as well on our community samples repo, which contains some construction tools and some modify tools, and actually might tell you how to add some leader lines and callouts to existing annotation. And so we'll jump back here over to my annotation. And so again, I'm in Pro. I have a little map here. It's got a couple of simple annotations, and I have a modify tool. And basically what I'm going to be doing in this modify tool is dragging a rectangle over some features. I'm going to iterate through those features. I'm going to change their text. I'm going to change their color. And I'm also going to rotate them if they happen to have a polyline shape. So if I go and activate this tool, you can see I can drag it over multiple if I want to. And when my sketch complete async has finished, I'm going to come in here. And the first thing I'm going to do is get the features underneath my cursor. Start up my edit operation. And then for every feature which is of type annotation layer, I'm going to get all of those features. I'll get a comma delimited list. So you can see that in this case I have multiple features. I'll call the callback function, and then where's my key? F5. And then rather than actually jumping into the callback function, it's going to jump over that, because remember my callback doesn't actually get executed until my execute is implemented. So I'll call my execute function, and then once the execute is called, it actually enters my callback. So my query filter gets set up, passing in my object IDs. So here's my query filter, object ID in a subset. Go ahead and get the table off my annotation layer. Run a search, passing in false, saying I want a non-recyclable cursor. And then I'll iterate through all of those results. And for each one, cast it to an annotation feature, get my graphic, change my text to hello world, get the symbol, change its color to red. I'm interested in also changing my horizontal alignment, so I'll cast to a sim text symbol to change the alignment. I'll get the text graphic shape. In this situation, I can see that my shape is going to be a polyline, so I can cast to a polyline. And then I'm going to find the centroid of that polyline, rotate the baseline, and set the shape back to the text graphic. And once I've done all of those items and modifications to my sim text graphic, I want to set that back on my annotation feature. I want to call store, and then I want to invalidate the cache. So if I go ahead and run this, it'll come through a second time because I have a second feature. But you can see here that my text has changed to hello world, it's been rotated, and it's also changed color. One of the things, as I was mentioning with SIM, is again wanting to be able to see the XML definition. One utility function that we've written is this SIM dockpane. It's pretty easy to find this. It's available on a GitHub resource. You can just open up a Google window and Google for Esri Anno SIM viewer, and this should come up. What it will give me is a dockpane, which lets me select, and I can go ahead and click and drag over an annotation feature. And what that will give me is actually the SIM text graphic for that feature, the XML of that SIM text graphic. So you can see that basically a SIM text graphic has a symbol, has a couple of properties including text, and then also has a shape. In this instance, I know that all of my annotation features are actually of type polyline. But if you actually look at the symbol, we have a SIM symbol reference and then a SIM text symbol. And you can see all the different properties here which are available on that SIM object to change. We have things like flip angles, we have font family name, font style name, font type. We can do things like halos, kerning, letter spacing, letter width. There's all sorts of types of properties that are available in this SIM text graphic. So if you're particularly interested in working with annotation and you have complicated annotation, it can be useful to use this utility to look at things to see how it's actually defined in the SIM. Do you have text? Do you have leader lines? Do you have halos? Do you have any of the callbacks? And how are those populated, especially if you're doing annotation modifications in terms of edit operations? I'm back?
Yep.
Okay. So that's pretty much our introduction to editing. Probably not much of an introduction as much as you were hoping. We did get a little deep on a few things, I think. But the advanced editing class is on tomorrow, 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock. They're going to go a little deeper into edit operations, the other instances where you might want to use the callback function, deeper on what a chaining operation is and when you should use chaining operation. There's also best practices for consistency in the editing experience when you have a lot of different data sources. Do you have a combination of version data, unversioned data, feature surface data? How do I work with edit operations over all of those? They're going to cover that. They're also going to cover edit events and how you hook into edit events and the different edit events that are available. Next slide, please. We're still only at Tuesday. We have the rest of the week still to go, and there's a lot of other pro .NET sessions, as you can see there. Wednesday's pretty full. Thursday we have a 6-hour getting started hands-on workshop, which would definitely recommend you should attend at some point if you have the time. That's going to be taken by somebody from Esri instructors. A lot of the SDK staff are going to rotate in and out, so if you have specific questions or need help with some things, then that's a good place to go. We're also available on the island for the rest of the week. Next slide.
But we certainly do encourage you to attend all those Pro SDK sessions as possible, or as many as possible.
Yeah. There's a couple of demo theaters on tomorrow, and also another Road Ahead session on Thursday, I believe. And I think that's all we have. So, anybody with any questions, or have we stunned you all into silence? Yes?
Does Pro support dimension editing?
No, dimensions are currently not in Pro. Not yet. Probably 2019. Any others? Yes?
I think I asked this question, but I will ask it again. So the inspector, you said it has a GUI, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Can it be overridden?
No. No. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you for attending and have a good evening, and hopefully we'll catch you all tomorrow.